All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to dive into a really fascinating spiritual concept. It's this idea that completely flips the script on hardship, alienation, and all that struggle, suggesting it's not about personal failure, but actually a sign of a much, much deeper purpose.
So to really get this, let's start with a feeling that I think a lot of us can relate to. Have you ever felt like you're just on the outside looking in? You know, like you're constantly misunderstood, or maybe even feel like you're being targeted and you just can't figure out why?
And that feeling, right, that sense of being just different, that's really the jumping off point for this whole framework. The source we're digging into today makes the case that this isn't just some phase you go through. For some people, it's a deep, lifelong sense of being set apart from everyone else.
And we're not talking about just general loneliness here. The source gets super specific. Like, have you ever walked into a room and just felt the whole vibe change? Or caught people glaring at you for what seems like absolutely no reason? The idea here is that these aren't just you being weird or having social anxiety, no. It's a kind of heightened perception, a way of sensing underlying tensions and truths that most people are completely oblivious to.
Okay, and right here is where the whole thing takes a massive turn. After laying out all these feelings that a lot of people recognize in themselves, the source hits you with a pretty radical idea. The reason for all this friction, all this weirdness, it has nothing to do with a flaw in your personality or just a string of bad luck. The explanation, it claims, is spiritual.
So what's the answer then? How does this idea explain that feeling of being an outcast? Well, it offers up a brand new identity, the chosen one. And in doing so, it reframes a whole life of struggle into powerful, undeniable evidence of a divine mission.
Okay, so what do they even mean by chosen one here? In this context, it's a person who's said to carry a kind of divine mark or anointing. And this isn't something you go out and earn. It's just part of who you are. And here's the crucial part. That quality, just by existing, is automatically a threat to what the source calls spiritual darkness.
And get this. The idea is that this whole conflict, this whole spiritual battle, starts way before you even have a clue what's going on. The theory goes that you were a target from a very young age, not because of anything you did, but because of the divine potential you were born with.
This is a really important distinction the source makes. The pushback you feel from the world isn't a reaction to your personality or the things you say and do. No, the argument is that it's a reaction to who you are at your core. Your very presence is like a bright light that automatically exposes things that would much rather stay hidden in the dark.
But, that brings up a pretty big question. Why all the struggle? Why so much resistance? Well, according to this worldview, the constant fight you're in isn't a sign that you're weak. It's actually direct confirmation of just how powerful you are.
And this is where you can really see that reframing in action. So on one hand, you've got what we might call social anxiety or bad luck or personal flaws. But on the other side, in this framework, that's not social anxiety. That's spiritual warfare. Getting rejected isn't just rejection. It's prophetic protection, keeping you away from people and places that aren't for you. Every hardship proves you're important enough to be a target.
And this quote, man, it really drives the point home. The conflict is seen as totally impersonal on a human level, but deeply personal on a spiritual one. It's not about you, your face, your personality. It's about your presence, the spiritual authority you supposedly carry.
So the big takeaway here, the real mind bender, is that every single negative thing gets flipped on its head. It becomes a good sign. Hardship basically becomes data. An attack isn't just a setback. It's a preemptive strike from an enemy who's terrified of what you're about to become. It's a sign you're about to take territory. The more resistance you feel, the bigger your spiritual weight is said to be.
Okay, so let's say someone buys into this. They accept this idea. What happens then? Well, the final chapter in the story is all about waking up to who you really are, and then learning how to actually live that way. And the source lays out this awakening as a pretty clear 3-step process. First up, you've got isolation, but it's reframed as strategic preparation, not a punishment. Then that leads to what's called divine remembrance, where you start to reconnect with that deep purpose you've always kind of felt. And finally, you get to walking in authority, where you stop being a victim and start acting in alignment with that divine calling. And this isn't all just abstract spiritual stuff. It has real, practical consequences for your life. It's described as this big shift away from being a people pleaser to finally setting what they call holy boundaries, these firm lines that protect your energy and your purpose.
Now, this whole awakening thing, it's not all smooth sailing. There's a cost. It usually means you start to outgrow old friends, you can't stand shallow conversations anymore, and you lose connections that were tied to the old you. But the source is really clear here. This isn't loss, it's shedding. You're just getting rid of an old skin so you can step into your role as a divine disruption. And this line really captures that transformation perfectly. That feeling of falling apart, like you're just being crushed by everything, it gets reframed. You aren't breaking down, you are breaking through into a whole new level of purpose.
And that really brings us right back to the beginning, to the absolute core message of this whole thing. The resistance you feel becomes the ultimate validation. It's not a measure of how weak you are. It's confirmation of your spiritual weight. The struggle itself is the proof of your calling.
So we want to leave you with one final thought, a pretty provocative question to chew on. If you were to adopt this framework, even just as a thought experiment, how would that change the meaning of your own struggles? If all that resistance isn't an obstacle, but actually a confirmation of your purpose, what does that make you? Thanks for hanging out with us on The Explainer.